Today, especially on places like YouTube, there's a lot of content that promotes what is referred to as the red pill. And the red pill for many men today is how bad relationships are, and to some extent, that the government basically seizes funds from men, typically through divorce and child support. And so, as a result, many men have opted not to get involved with relationships. Women have, in their minds, have become more promiscuous. And so, as a result, looking back in time when women were virgins or had a lower body count, and nowadays women are pushed to be more accepting of the free sexual mindset that men have had for quite some time. And so when you look back at history, the narrative that many men today have about the family courts and where the family courts came from, how they were instituted and why they were instituted, a lot of it results from misinformation. So when you look back at history, the purpose of the family court back then, where you had fault divorce, was to keep women in marriages where men were, in essence, cheating on their wives. And so women pushed and went to court, and eventually men instituted what is referred to as no fault divorce, meaning that now the man could divorce the woman at no fault. Before that, the way that people were able to seek divorces was either there had to be like infidelity, the person was abusive, or they didn't provide. And so unless either party could meet that burden through the court, then no divorce would take place. And so the women back then, we're talking about the 1900s, where women were complaining that their husbands were cheating on them with the other women. And of course, they couldn't prove it. And the other thing is that back then, they didn't have courts where they were to give the woman an attorney. The woman had to pay for it, and because women weren't working, women couldn't afford to pay for the attorney. And so they were in essence stuck in these relationships where they were being abused by men, but couldn't get out because of the way that the system was designed back then. And so we look at the court system today and we say, well, the court system is not fair towards men. And also, it was originally established as a result of men being abusive towards women. And a lot of that information is often left out of red pill talking points. I don't think anybody ever covers any of that information. Now, of course, at a time period where the government was creating inflation, the government loved this idea, especially now, of driving a wedge between men and women, because they needed women to go to work to tax their labor so that they can pay for the entitlements of the baby boomers and the people that came before them. And so now the government, of course, this is why you see so much of this information. It's so plentiful on the internet because it fits right into the government's needs. And so this is why I typically say what you see that's very popular on YouTube is typically what you're designed to see, either by the government outright putting that propaganda, or the government allowing this propaganda via the algorithms to become, of course, very popular. Like, for example, the whole World War III narrative that is going on right now, or that the stock market is going to collapse, housing market is going to collapse, etc. This is the narrative, of course, that is pushed out there. Or the dollar is going to go away, go out and buy gold, sort of people. And because these are all narratives that fit within the scheme, as long as you don't understand what is actually going on, well, then that's beneficial to the government, because as long as the government can keep you out of the loop, well, then they can go about their business. And so if you, like, for example, with Andrew Tate, why is Andrew Tate so popular, right? It's because he fits right into the narrative of what is going on between men and women relationships, and keeping these individuals, in essence, at bay. And so as long as many young men can believe that someone is on our side and that we're, progressing, as it were, well, then that's okay. Those people won't revolt against us. They won't revolt against us, because typically revolution comes from the youth and the people who are downtrodden, and then they eventually rebel against the powers that be. And so no one talks about that. No one preaches revolution. No one ever talks about revolution. It is always, well, we need to stay away from women. Women are whores. Women are X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, these people are in essence slaves to government and to corporations. And of course, men will say, especially white men, this is why it's so weird seeing a lot of this from many white men who talk about this. And it's overwhelmingly because they're in essence enslaved to governments through corporations. And so you can look at your women and you can understand that these women are in essence slaves to corporations, slaves to the government tax form. And then you can look at these women and say to these women who are in essence captives, right? This is what you get in wars, right? They kill off the men and they take the women and children as slaves. And so in essence, men in general lost their women in the war, in the economy, to the government, and the government took them in essence as slaves, and they taxed them, they used them for labor. And then you look at these women over here, and your first thought isn't to free the women. Of course, women are easily fooled. Women are very easily fooled. This is why the Bible, through the Apostle Paul, has said in relation to what happened in the Garden of Eden, that Eve was deceived by the devil, but Adam made a choice. And so many men today understand that women have bought the narrative of feminism. They've bought the narrative of being strong and being independent. They've bought the narrative of being a boss babe, as they say. But they make the choice to knowingly see that their women are in essence slaves to a narrative, slaves to corporations, and of course at the end of the day, slaves to the government, and not desire liberation. Now, of course, it obviously has to come from the people. Women are not going to shoulder their rifle, as they say, and push for liberation. That comes from men. This is why when the Taliban that fought for 20 years, they fought for their country, they fought for their sons, they fought for their wives, they fought for their women. For the better part of 20 years, 2 decades, almost like a generation was born, that were born in the struggle, as they say. And these men never gave up. And this is why I said in the previous video that in looking at the Taliban, of course, people look at the Taliban and the narrative of terrorism. And I look at a group of men that, despite having no military, despite having no naval force, and despite having no air force, push back against the world's biggest government for the better part of 20 years. And of course, they did this because at the end of the day, they weren't going to give up their country. They definitely weren't going to give up their families. They weren't going to give up their women. And at the end of the day, people were sitting, the feminists in America were imagining, a sort of Hunger Games sort of scenario where the women were going to take up their weapons. They're going to be out there with their bows, the shield maiden, sort of the Amazonian sort of narrative that women were going to go out there and shoulder their rifle against the Taliban. And they did none of that. The women did none of that. At the end of the day, when the people realized, yes, some individuals had to be made an example of for collaborating with the enemy. And so overwhelmingly, they killed the men. They killed the men who collaborated with the United States. And some of the women who foolishly thought that they were going to rise up, as they say. And of course, that didn't happen. And so some people were made an example of, and then those men got their country back. And then the women went back to being women. And so many men nowadays might feel the exact same way. These women are going to rise up against us. That's not going to happen. Women will adapt to the environment that you put them in. And so if the men in this country allow the men in the government to create a system, well, then the women are going to adapt to that system. And of course, if the local men go right along with it in a system of degeneracy, well, then you shouldn't be surprised, because realistically speaking, what are the women going to do? Are the women going to push back against the system? No, women do not have the ability to shape their environment. Cultures and society are created by men and enforced by men, and women adapt to said environment at the end of the day. And the idea of, well, you need to take the red pill is literally preaching a white flag to most men. This idea of no children, no cohabitation, no sharing of bank accounts. I mean, shoot, you have men nowadays that promote that you shouldn't even date. No, some people push this. They push what they refer to as monk mode. And this is the story of how defeated men are in the United States. This mindset is the mindset of a defeated people, to the point where they will virtue signal to the government that we won't even have dealings with these women. They understand that these women belong to the government and, in essence, wave the white flag of a red pill. Because realistically speaking, what society thrives and flourishes where there are no children? This is why the country's border is wide open. Because for the government that exists now within the United States to maintain its power, it needs women to go to work. And so men will in essence do the lying down like the men in China. Like the men in China, they just will refuse to work. And this is why it was important to get rid of slavery, because slaves will only work so hard. You can only drive people by force so hard. And so if you free them and you give them the narrative of being free, well, then they feel more like they're working for themselves, working for their own benefit, and they're more likely to work harder. This was a good video that was done a very long time ago by Stefan Molyneux, talking about the story of your enslavement and why back then they had removed slavery for debt slavery that exists today. And so from my perspective, when I look at a lot of these people and a lot of these talking points, and it's like, well, if you don't create the environment for women to adapt to, then what are you expecting from these women, realistically speaking? Because telling other men that you should not cohabitate with women, that you should not bear children with women, not sharing finances with a woman, is just indicative of the mindset of a man who has accepted his plight. He realizes that he has no power, he has no ability to revolt, and so the only thing that he can do is accept. And then, of course, he becomes a proselytizer of this acceptance of your slavery. And in my opinion, that is what the red pill is for many men. That is what the red pill is for many men, to just accept your plight. And this is a way for them to revolt against the system, at least in their minds. But from the government standpoint, it fits right into the narrative. If you don't have any dealings with their women, well, that's fine by them, because they don't. If you try to attempt to have children with these women, the narrative is they'll push these women to divorce you so that they can steal your labor through the court system. And of course, this is the best, in essence, that the men of today have come up with, whereas peoples back then would have realized it's time for a revolution.